you are on mute. If you keep yourself on mute throughout the call, and then if you've got any questions when we get to the end, then obviously I can unmute you. At the bottom of your screen, for those not familiar with Zoom, and I suspect you're all very familiar now, there is a chat box. And if you've got any questions you want to ask of our presenters today, or anyone for that matter, please use that, and I can pick up on the questions as we go through the call. Once again, we'll be recording the call because a number of people have asked for a copy of the presentations today, but can't join us live, as it were. So as I say, yes, since the 19th of March, I think between the MAAG, PRCA and Pimento, we've jointly hosted over 100 events and attracted more than 3,000 participants during that time. I think rather inevitably, I think some of us are beginning to get the Zoom fatigue. And obviously the agenda has continued to evolve over the last few weeks since the first event we ran and to where we are now with COVID. Following today's event, what I will be doing is we'll be sharing with you a very, very, very short survey, literally a 4-question survey, really to understand from you what sorts of resources and support you need, given where we are now as we move to a period of coming out of lockdown. So if you could complete that survey, that would be really helpful, because obviously we'll then use that as the basis of designing the various different webinars and activities over the next few weeks. What we'll probably do, in fact, what we've decided to do is we're going to take a rest next Wednesday, partly because it clashes with half term, whatever that is, and partly also because obviously I want to take into account the survey feedback, and then we'll be returning the following week, or the Wednesday session. That said, I think we still have 12 events between now and next Friday. So after this call today, I'll issue and send out a copy of all of our events for the next few weeks. Right, so where are we? Interesting point, and something actually I have to say that I read earlier in the week and have adapted, brackets stolen, but I thought there was an interesting article that I read about the fact that economic crises have a tendency to accelerate economic trends that are already happening. And I think we've seen that particularly in this crisis. In fact, if you think about how sudden extreme the recent downturn has been, I'd argue that the acceleration has been quicker than we've probably previously experienced. You look at the likes of Netflix and Disney, who already were eating Hollywood and for the pandemic. And if you look at what's happened since then, also look at things like home delivery services, which are already very much beginning to impact upon retail chains and turning shopping centres into ghost towns. Again, we've seen the acceleration there. Certainly working from home services, we're already making inroads into the corporate world. I bet we wish we'd all had shares in Zoom before this all started. And also we've seen larger corporations having to respond to more flexible working with no choice. And now as a result of which actually questioning whether they need to have the offices they've got in central locations around the UK and beyond. But actually, I think it's fair to say that actually this acceleration isn't really limited just to business and economics. It's also taking place in our personal lives. Relationships have been accelerated. A couple of friends of mine, in fact, actually my niece, were in new relationships with their boyfriends as they went into lockdown. And obviously, what it's done, I think, is accelerated those relationships. And what we've also witnessed, I suppose, is that relationships were already were in perhaps dire states. But I imagine there's been an increase, either positively or negatively, to the natural conclusions of some of those relationships too. And, in paradox, I guess our lives have not been paused, yet our emotional and cultural changes have accelerated. The erosion of trust in our media and governments in particular accelerated. Polarization has found, I guess, a sixth gear, and disinformation and propaganda is proliferating right away across the social media front. I mean, forget about 2017 or 2016 election. We have seen so much crap, frankly, on social media, and so much crap spoken about by politicians around the world, particularly in North America. Is quite frightening. So I think we have to get ready. I think we have to basically recognise that that speed of acceleration, particularly in the digital space, is going to continue, that the merger between digital and physical will continue, and that sort of the technocrat future is very much here to stay. So on that theme, so I'm really, really, really pleased to warmly welcome Paul Stanway, Clive Mission, and Annabelle Dunstan. All of them have a view on the future and some insights to share with us, which is great. I'll introduce Paul first, who's going to be our first speaker. And many of you on this call will know of Paul, and perhaps will have met Paul at some of our 6 p.m. clubs. He's been a member of Pimento for many years. He's the creative director and co-founder of XYZ, who are Campaign's Creative Experience Agency of the Year and the Drums Experience Agency of the Year. So I suppose that's fairly definitive. They're the top of the tree at the moment, and they're doing some great work. Brand events and experiential agencies in general have been really hit hard, obviously, by the lockdown. And XYZ, which is only 7 years old, remarkably, to have climbed to that position at the top of the tree, have been hit like a lot of other experiential agencies. First 2 months of 2020, in fact, were their best ever. And I'd imagine since the end of February, obviously, there's been a bit of a change in both the revenue streams, but no change in the enthusiasm and the creativity that they have demonstrated for their clients. We know that creativity comes in many shapes or form, and when your back's against the wall, perhaps sometimes you come up with the best solutions and the best way of working around problems. And I guess Paul is really evidence of that. Paul will provide an XYZ eccentric view, or even centric view, could be eccentric, on how they are adapting and the challenges that they face in the live entertainment industry. And with over 20 years experience in delivering international experiential projects for the likes of Nike, Xbox, Apple, Converse, Diageo and Levi's, I think is pretty well versed and understands that particular marketplace and that particular landscape. He's also just recently finished his dissertation for an MSc on creativity and leadership. And in many respects, as I say, he's best placed to give his insights to what's likely to happen in the industry and how they are evolving their proposition to support their clients. So Paul, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I think you're going to share some slides with us too, but it's really good to have you on board, mate. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate it. Appreciate being asked and everyone spending a bit of time for us. And as Stephen mentioned, yeah, what I'll do is I'll give you about 15 minutes, a bit of an introduction to XYZ and who we are so that you can understand how we've had to adapt and change. And I think to Stephen's point, what I will be doing is providing some insights into how we've had to adapt. It's not necessarily a plan that all of you should try and follow. It's not me selling a service to you or a package. It's merely a journey that's work in progress for us. And some of it may resonate with you. Some of it may reinforce things you're already doing. Some of it might be just you saying, hey, I'm glad I'm not them, but our sector's not so badly hit. So without further ado, I will share my screen with you. Bear with me one moment. Okay. So could everybody see that slide?
Yep.
Marvellous, thank you. So yeah, we are XYZ, formed by myself and Will Mould, my business partner, and we worked together for many years prior to 2012 when we first formed XYZ. And since day one, we've been a member of Pimento. And in fact, one of our founding clients, SSC, was courtesy of Stephen and Pimento's embracing of us and help in establishing the agency. We're completely independent. We're around 20 full-time staff, and we have a wider family of freelancers like most people in the events industry. We rely on those people, and they're going through a really tough time as well at the moment. And we work for clients on a project-by-project basis. So sometimes that lasts many, many years, and sometimes it's a much shorter life cycle. But ultimately, we are only as good as our last project. And when you're in a situation where you have no projects, you are in a position where you need to start thinking about how you do business and how you can do business going forward. So moving on to just a bit of insight on our mission. Everything that we do at XYZ is about people in a place with a purpose. That's how it starts, an experience that we design with our clients that starts in the live arena, but where it goes can encompass content creation, packaging design, gifting, retail, as well as the full range of experience, live events. From 10,000 people in Trafalgar Square with Calvin Harris for Beck's Beer, through to 10 journalists in Apple's Milan office doing a deep dive into a new operating system launch. So it's a real gamut of activity there that we do, but everything is about creating a positive behavior change for our clients. That's ultimately what we're looking to do. And the people that we work with are quite a broad range of people. I would say mostly in what you call the lifestyle sector, but not exclusively that. And what we do for them is a mix of B2C events, B2B events. We do media and press launches, products and services, as well as brand launches. And we also do quite a lot of staff engagement work as well. So everything that relies on an experience to change behaviour is encompassed by a number of these brands that we work with. And we work with some of these guys predating XYZ, and some are very recent additions to the stable. And the capabilities that we have tended to talk about historically have been things like project management, event management, which you would expect from an experiential agency. Technical production and content creation have been a big part of what we do, but increasingly over the past 18 months or so, we've moved into creative and experiential strategy work with clients, and that's been an area that we've been looking to really build on as a business anyway. And as Stephen so kindly said, what we've found over the years is we picked up a bit of recognition along the way, and that's been building up to what happened just last month, where Campaign were kind enough to award us Creative Experience Agency of the Year. We were up against some of the really well-established big agencies there, so to get that was a really nice surprise. And we've had a brilliant Q1. We did a world launch, global product launch for Lego. We did a very big piece for Converse, and things appear to be going well. And then this happened. And for us, and again, this is very XYZ-centric, and I'm sure you've all got your own stories and your own perspectives on this. But for us, the very thing that we're good at could potentially kill people now, you know, and that's a very sobering existential threat. You know, gathering people together in a place is now the least attractive option for many marketeers and for all of us as individuals. We've had projects cancelled, we've had projects postponed, much like all of you guys, I'm sure. Pitches rescheduled, cancelled. You know, there have been one or two exceptions, and we've become adept at presenting over platforms like this. But we were faced with a choice. Do we fight or do we flight? You know, to go back to that kind of primordial response here, you know, do we hibernate and hope there's a business and there's a sector to emerge into at the end of all of this, or do we try and do something about it? And as Stephen kindly mentioned earlier in the intro, in a rare feat of good timing for once in my life, I managed to complete my master's degree in innovation, creativity and leadership at the start of this year, just before the shutters came down on normal life. And part of that was looking at strategy and innovation from an academic and a scientific point of view, and how that can be applied. And as we were kind of coming to terms with everything that was happening in the world and happening to our business, a few little chinks of light kind of shone through that. And one of those was this quote from Govinda Haran and his 3-box solution. And this idea that strategy has to be a dynamic, rhythmic process that never stops, isn't cemented, is not a big millstone that you plant and the world revolves around. His work is very much about understanding that strategy, big or small, needs to be dynamic, and it needs to be continually reappraised and tweaked and incrementally improved if it's going to be fit for purpose and have value for organizations, big or small. Part of his work and his body of work is really interesting and very accessible. So I would strongly recommend the work that he's done by himself, and also with Chris Trimble on innovation strategy. But this is not going to be a presentation about this, but it's a contextual piece that I think is really useful for us and maybe for you. Is strategy tends to be managed by most organizations in box one. You're managing the present, you're keeping things ticking along, it's repeatable, it's profitable. And what Govinda Haran is saying is that the 3 boxes really need to be managed at various points in time. You need to manage the present, absolutely. That's how we create organizations that have value. But there comes time when you need to selectively abandon the past, and that might be because your competitors are stealing a march on you. It might be because world events have suddenly changed the world fundamentally. So the ability to look at what you do, the present, and to be able to get rid of or change the things that are no longer viable, no longer working for you, is incredibly important. And in doing so, what you can then do is move into that box 3 of your strategy, which is creating a future. By abandoning the things that are no longer relevant or important, you're creating a future that in turn becomes the present, because that becomes your normal working business, your operating procedures. And so this cycle should be in motion, a perpetual motion machine almost. And what he does, which I won't attempt to do now, but he creates some really interesting links with Hindu religion that has over 330 million deities, but the 3 main ones are Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma. And within that philosophy, there's a balance between preservation, destruction, and creation that creates this dynamic movement of the universe. And for that, we can read business, we can read strategy, where quite dramatic things may happen, but they tend to be as a result of incremental changes through a cycle like this. And so this 3-box solution was quite interesting part of my studies, but also started to kind of formulate a way of thinking that perhaps we could apply XYZ. We're a small, allegedly agile, nimble organization. So let's have a look at how we can really embrace this and selectively abandon what the pre-COVID world said we had to do and start thinking about the in-COVID and the post-COVID world might require of an agency like us in the sector that we work in. And so taking that mindset, we started looking at our processes and what we could do. You could call it low-hanging fruit. You could look at looking inside yourself before you look outside of yourself for solutions. But we found that we tended to work with clients on unpacking a brief for a project. We would then go away. We would work on our own processes using our own methodology to come up with outputs and solutions for clients that we would then present back to them above that line. So we would start visible to the client, we would go invisible, and then we would become visible again. And those processes that we use to deliver on briefs for clients involve creative problem solving methodologies that have been proven over time. We use things like design thinking and several other ways and tools of creating solutions to problems, ideating, really evaluating those ideas, revisiting the problem if we need to. And what we found that was a potential for us was to make those invisible processes visible to clients and start packaging what we were doing every day in the privacy of our own office into something that could help clients. And helping them is what we were able to start doing through these kind of new back of house procedures last year. And we started working with some clients in new ways, with some new clients in ways that ordinarily we wouldn't necessarily have been considered. So we were able to work with people like Major League Baseball and Nike and Tanqueray, who were experiential clients, but through facilitating workshops and a creative problem solving process that sometimes worked on experiential problems, but often wasn't. It was giving us, in one sense, access higher up the stream to the briefs for experiential projects that we may well be involved in down the line, but it was also exposing us to product design and campaign strategy problems that we don't normally get involved in. And through using processes that we've become quite good at and become very confident in using, we were able to help them because perhaps they didn't have the time or the resources or the inclination to do these repeatable, deliberate, constructive processes themselves. And so what we found was at the tail end of last year and the beginning of this year, we were able to engage clients in new ways just by understanding what we were doing behind the scenes had value to them if we tweaked and we adjusted them so that they became something that could be of use to our clients. So that was something that we've started and continuing to do, and hopefully we'll do more of in the future. And then looking at what our adjacencies are, going back to the dissertation piece that Stephen mentioned earlier, I did a lot of research for my dissertation, which was about understanding how other design processes could be put to use in creating a live experience design process that's best practice, and looking at what are the granular touch points, what are the key attributes of these processes, and where else do they exist is something that we did as XYZ. So we looked at what do we do, like the back of house processes to ideate and problem solve. What else do we produce for clients that exist in other sectors that are adjacent to where we are? This is not about doing a really kind of stretching the bridge of credibility and suddenly creating a PPE factory, because that's the hot trend right now, if that's not too dismissive a thing to say. It was about looking at where we could credibly and authoritatively move into, using things that we found ourselves good at and are able to deliver. And one example of this is customer experience design. So we create experiences very often in complementary ways to what customer experience designers do. We're looking for same behavior change outcomes. We use similar tools, we use similar processes. And when you look at retail brands, of whom we work for several, you start to see a distressed sector at the best of times. Sales are now going off a cliff in physical retail. But you're seeing people like Salesforce and McKinsey talking about how important experiences will be for brands to differentiate themselves going forward. Talking about how those brands that value and actively design customer experiences have a better chance of surviving COVID and thriving post-COVID. So what we can do, and we should be doing, is now looking at ways in which we can move into areas like that, using the skills that we've got and the attributes that we have in-house already, and just dialing up the priority of those and dialing up our expertise in those areas, and actively packaging, like we did our back-of-house processes in the workshops, to clients that have physical retail that may be looking at the world in the future and not understanding how they're going to put that £3-4 million a year flagship store to good use, when baked in behavior over the past 8 weeks, potentially the next 8 weeks, is going to be about online sales and much more commoditized sales and not anything to do with physical retail. So actively looking at what we have within us and how that can be redeployed and reframed to push us into adjacent areas is also something that we're looking at doing, but not so far reaching that we're stretching the credibility bridge. And so when we go back to our capabilities and we look at perhaps how we might expand those, we're looking at perhaps talking more about XYZ as being people that, yes, can design and deliver live experiences, and that will be our kind of our heart and soul and our DNA, but looking at creative strategy as a solution to clients and a service we provide. Experience design, not just in the live arena, but customer experience, retail experience, other adjacent design areas that we can really use our expertise in. Workshop facilitation. We have a design studio in-house that we use for every experience anyway, bringing that up in the mix to show clients that we can do stuff that doesn't necessarily rely on people in a place at the same time. And another quote that sort of springs to mind and has helped us really kind of understand better what we need to do is from Alvin Toffler's Future Shock work of 1970, which feels a terrifyingly long time ago now. Not many trend reports stand the test of time for that long, but his work, I think, has some key bits that are still ringing true, and particularly this one, this idea that being able to unlearn and relearn is the new literacy. Facts, as we've seen, and as Stephen mentioned, facts can be disputed, they get old in a hurry. Information has a shorter shelf life than strategy these days. So ways of thinking become more important when the objects and the information that you rely on become obsolete ever more quickly, and worlds can fundamentally change within a matter of 2 months. If you can develop ways of thinking that allow you to keep moving and stay dynamic, you'll be able to weather many storms. And coming to the end here, I think there's a huge pressure on all of us, not least commercial and financial, to move quickly in a very fast-changing, complex and ambiguous world that's changing so quickly. And one of the things that we found ourselves doing at XYZ was reacting against that. We wanted to make sure that we didn't rush into day 2 of the lockdown with, 15 different hot takes on how live events should change and suddenly try and pivot ourselves into a VR studio. What we wanted to do was to make sure that we really took time to understand the root problem of what we were facing, not the superficial one, not the one that's screaming loudest, but really understand what is the thing that we need to address as an organization that will help us make sure that we survive for the long term, that we can keep our team engaged, involved and employed, as we have done now, and make sure that we maintain relevance and can offer value to people beyond the bubble that we find ourselves in now. And so we took time, we took deep breaths, we engaged in a proper process to really try and dig deep into what it was we had to change and where we needed to go in order to give ourselves the best chance to not just survive but thrive coming out of this. And so I think John Dewey put it far better in his role as philosopher and educator than I ever could. But I think making sure that you give yourself time to really understand what the problem statement is and give yourself the best chance of success by identifying that and not just rushing with a quick fix. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully there's something in there that chimes or just triggers something for you. I know that some of you are facing very similar issues. Some of you are facing very different ones. But this is our story. It's a work in progress. We're seeing some good developments, some encouraging signs from some of the stuff we've developed as a result of behaving like this. So I hope you guys are too. And I wish everyone here the best of luck going forward.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It was really interesting to get some insights as to how you are thinking differently and how creative solutions are coming from that process that you've adopted there. It's also interesting for me, and we'll come back to talk about questions in a minute, about actually thinking beyond single disciplines and actually thinking about actually, coming up with creative solutions to problems, rather than actually just saying, we're an events experiential business and therefore we basically have to apply our thinking through those lenses, as it were. Right, sir, well, can I come back to some questions at the end? Clive, are you there, sir?
I'm here, yeah.
You're there, brilliant, good to see you, good morning. For those that don't know Clive, he is a director of MAAG, who are partners of Pimento, and we've been working very closely with them over the last few weeks. And we're talking a little bit about actually how we're going to look to extend that relationship going forward. Clive, in addition to his role at the MAAG, is also he's chair of Think Jam, the L Group, TBK Group, and Global Musicians, who are producers of Six. He's worked in marketing agencies and around trade bodies for a pretty long time. And by his own admission, he has no formal marketing training, so he's learned it on the job and through instinct. And being an entrepreneur. In the late 1980s, he acquired Marketing Drive from DMB and built it into an agency that was a top 10 promotional agency in the UK and sold it to True North. In 2001, he started Mentor Marketing and Investment to mentor and invest in independent agencies. These included acquiring from the administrator a business that became KitKat Noir, and he sold that to the Publicis Group in 2011. He's always been a fierce advocate of being part of associations that represent the collective interests of agencies and disciplines. And this has resulted in spells as chair of the IPM, the Institute of Professional Marketing, and the MAA, which was the forerunner to the MAAG. As part of this, he's also been chair of the CAP Promotion and Direct Response Group and members of both CAP Council and the Advertising Association Council. And of course, he is a huge supporter of the independent sector, but not particularly much of a fan when it comes to the big groups. So, Clive, very excited, particularly about this presentation today, and thank you for coming along. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. For those who are a bit better at using the slide presentation, I know that you can see my next slide. Do you know which button I push in order that you can't?
You go down to left a bit. Left a bit again, or right on your screen. I think you go full screen. So no, one in between. I think it's the one in between.
This one?
Yeah, at least so. Oh, no, it's subtitles.
Right, sorry.
Maybe that box over here. Go left again. No, not right. Keep going. Keep going. One next to the pencil. Does that not adjust it?
Up at the top where it says display settings.
I was going to say it's display settings.
Sorry. Display setting. Here we are. Yeah.
That's the trouble. Is Max.
This one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No. Do the swap.
Yeah.
Is that it? Okay. Can you see that? Everyone there?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen, for the introduction. As they say, follow that, Paul. That was tremendous. And maybe I'm going to lower the tone because I'm certainly no philosopher, so John Dewey's got nothing to on me. But I'm going to try and do something in terms of a little bit about futurism, and get your views on maybe how we come out of all of this stuff. And I think we're going to be well placed. It might not feel like it at the moment, but I think independent agencies have got a great opportunity. But as I say, it's just a pity that it's now, because we're facing some challenging times. But I think we've responded well. I'm not going to give you too much about the MAAG. Most of you would know because of our work we've been doing with Pimento. But as Jason Fu, one of our members, has said, you know, we are an organisation, a bit like Pimento, that's flying the flag for independence. And we've been working very hard at doing that, particularly over the last 2 years, with our members and collaborating with anybody and everybody who has our same goals, in very much in terms of working with that group. So I think it's worth pointing out first that prior to COVID, the industry was in decline, both in relation to revenues and margins. And in 2019, 37% of agencies were seeing a decline in their revenues, which was up from 21% the year before. So it wasn't all kind of rosy. And I think that's kind of down to a number of things. Firstly, the massive oversupply of agencies. When I was chair of the IPM back in 2010, we used to talk about 12,500 agencies. It's now, the IPA and we agree, is somewhere in the region of 17,500. So it's just kind of growing. And then the in-housing of clients, of the work that we do, hasn't helped. And of course, procurement pressure. I'm not knocking procurement, but the general view is they're looking for more for less. So against all that, then we suddenly get hit by COVID. You know, it's something that changed things literally overnight. 89% of agencies in the reports that have been done saw a decline in their revenues. There was a massive hit in relation to cash flows. And I was on a call this morning with the Ad Association group, and they were reporting from their survey that 40% of people from their survey are expecting further cash flow issues going forward. So even 4 months in, it's by no means over. And 20% are concerned that they're actually going to run out of cash. A number of jobs have been lost, and a number of them are being furloughed. And clearly the momentum in terms of new business came grinding to a halt. But once we got over to all of this, and a bit as Paul described, we started to adapt to the new normal, and we got out of survival mode. And this is really where independence, I believe, came into their own, because they were able to show agility, innovation, flexibility. And the other thing was that they were staying close to their clients. And we've seen in some of the presentations on Pimento and MAAG that this thing about new business is about supporting and being relevant and not selling. And that might be counterculture to most of us, but we believe that actually that's the way to work with clients. And some of the strongest relationships certainly would exist within that one-on-one within the independent sector. So whilst we're looking at quotes, it is really about agility, and Bill Gates was saying some time ago, but success today requires the agility. And I think that certainly is probably more true over this last period than ever before. And I think the independents have shown that agility in relation to property. They got to remote working very quickly. They've been dealing with landlords. Their staff have adapted tremendously well, and they've adapted their skill sets. And I think, again, we saw that in Paul's presentation, which is how they were able to doing things which they were actually not doing before, but accelerated those very quickly. And I just thought one example, ThinkJam, which is a company that I'm involved in, they were looking at a product that they'd had called Remake, which is about localization of content. But over a 9-week period, they accelerated the development of that, brought it to market, and it was already in pilot tests with 3 clients through this period. So things which were kind of very much in development, but have accelerated very quickly. And that sort of innovation is something that I think fundamentally characterizes an agile independent. And then, of course, the thing which is going to put these businesses in good stead are what undoubtedly is going to be a lot of restructuring. People have gone for government loans, the furloughing. 65% of over 65% of agencies have taken that up, and our concern at the moment actually is that a lot of those furloughed might well actually become redundant. But that's for another day. Again, remote flexible working. 92% in the latest report are saying that they're working productively, and that's something that I think is going to stay. So you've got this restructuring, and one of the lines that I've heard quite repeatedly over the last 3 months is things that we're doing now, why didn't we do this years ago? So that acceleration of really the good things to do has been there in spades for independence. So what's been happening during this period? And this is where I'm going to come on to trying to be futuristic, but trying to get your support for things that Stephen and I and others have been talking about, because more groups are emerging that are catering for independence. We've seen that proliferation. There are lots of people talking about growth, a lot of talking about new business, they're talking about structuring and so on. And we're seeing those people emerging, and they have been there for some period of time. But out of that, like we've been working with Pimento, like we've been working with the Network One, like we've been working with other groups, there's been a huge amount of mutual support, and that's come out of COVID. Someone described them to yesterday where they might be frenemies, but we've actually been working very closely together to see that we can actually get a good result. So out of that, the view that I would like to express is that whilst there's no better time for an independent, we're not going to be able to do this all on our own. And this mutual support and this opportunity for independents to kind of come together, how can we take that forward in a really positive way and make independence as a group, in the same way that people talk about group agencies, how can we make that independent group for clients and the industry as a whole to be seen to be a considered and positive choice, to make it a unique group? It started to slowly come together, but because we've seen a lot of these groups, how do we kind of bring them together? And this is something that's been, we would all like to do, come out of this thing better than when we went in. So our thought very much at the moment is to try to create an association for independent agencies, which is about helping the independent agency community thrive in every way. And that puts the independent agency community at the heart. Where have I gone? Put it at the heart of everything that is that's going on, not only just in the UK, but globally, because out of those 17,500 agencies I talked about, probably 60% of them are independents, and therefore there's a long tail, and therefore mutual support should be something that should benefit everybody. So the purpose would be to celebrate the thriving independent agency community, and put it at the heart of the entrepreneurial and creative economy. And that way it becomes the preferred partner. Now, this is not just about MAAG, it's not just about Pimento, but there are lots of groups there. And so we would look at trying to create this third-party entity, which any group or any party that really wants to support the independent can invest. And that way we're creating one voice that actually represents and promotes the independence, whilst at the same time, different groups have got their own particular area of specialization, whether it's in terms of growth, or whether it's in terms of training, or whether it's in terms of just health and well-being. they can carry on, but there should be a place, a bit like the Advertising Association is for the whole industry, a place where everybody could come together, and with the sole goal of promoting the independent agency community. So the tasks that it would undertake would clearly be marketing. Part of that marketing would be awards. We know, there have been in excess of 50 award programs out there of all kinds of sorts, but they've been really fundamentally run by publishers, and therefore, there is perhaps a different kind of agenda. Whereas actually, if there was an awards that demonstrated the great work of the independent community, it could be seen in isolation and something to absolutely celebrate. Clearly, recruitment of new members into any of the partner organisations, so there'll be a menu of services that would be there, and the AIA can foster that. But clearly, representation within places like the Advertising Association, within things like the 3As, the IAA and other lobbying groups, to be presented as one group and not a range of disparate groups, as perhaps there are at the moment. So if we were to pull together, and if we were to make the most of the agility and adaptation that a lot of the independents have come together, we as a group, we as a kind of a cohesive group, should come out of COVID a whole lot better. And I think we have to look at it that to make the most of it, we have to thrive together as opposed to separately. And that would be my proposition from where we stand. So from that, I'd like to hand back to Stephen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clive. Obviously, I imagine there's going to be a lot of questions around the proposition and what we're hoping to do here. And over the next few weeks, we'll take the opportunity to take counsel from members of both the MAAG and Pimento. Just to be clear, this is not replacing Pimento. We're replacing the MAAG or Network One, who we've been talking to, or Local Plan and others. This is really an opportunity to do something different collectively, and to ensure that the independent industry actually is able to get more bang for its buck when it comes to actually competing with the likes of, dare I say, the Advertising Association that tends to lobby on behalf of the groups, and really the independent sector just doesn't really get much of a look in. So as ever, we believe that we're stronger together, and we think that actually by focusing on the areas that were outlined just now by Clive, which are all areas that really Pimento doesn't really get actively involved in, we can collectively do something that's a bit different and also take it onto an international stage, because I know many of our members are very keen to work overseas. Many of our members already do work overseas. The other area that I know we all feel very strongly about is, and passionate about, is the freelance community. And we've spoken about belonging, we've spoken about how freelancers just aren't supported, their legal status is always a bit questionable, and how they do get messed around. So again, we think there's opportunities to collaborate and help them at this time and beyond. So we'll be coming to you, as I say, over the next few weeks to talk about this, and then developing the organisation, as I say, will be separate from our own. We will obviously sit on the board, and we'll be looking to hire in talent from outside of Pimento and MAAG to actually manage and run this organisation. So thank you for that. We'll come back to questions at the end. As I said, Annabelle, where are you, my darling? Right in there somewhere, as always. At the top of the page now, fantastic. Most of you, I think, probably know Annabelle. She's been a contributor to some of our sessions over the last few weeks. She's also CEO and founder of Question and Retain. And today she's going to be sharing with us an independent agency survey that she's recently conducted. There's two parts to the survey. She's done a specialist project on behalf of the MAAG, which she's reporting on Friday. There she's sharing with us an ongoing survey that she's been doing, a pulse check survey. That's what she does for a living. She's an insights agency that specialises in conducting pulse check surveys with data analytics and consultancy, particularly in the agency sector, although not exclusively. She looks at client satisfaction and employee engagement, and she works across really all parts of the industry, in fact, all disciplines, and very closely with the PRCA. She also conducts one-to-one interviews with agencies' existing clients and post-pitch interviews. So we actually tries to get to the truth of why you didn't win the business or why you did win the business. And prior to setting up Q&R, she has spent her life in marketing comms. She was the MD of Monkeys Communication, which was an award-winning top 50 PR agency with some 75 consultants. She's regularly invited to judge employee experience and engagement awards and is passionate about what makes her outstanding workplace. So it's great to have her along today. She's also a former TV presenter, not a lot of people know that, lumberjack assistant, a ski guide, and a sailing instructor. So she's a lady of many parts. Annabelle, I'm going to pull up your. Should you pull your charts up, or do you want to talk a little bit first?
I'll just talk for a minute first, and then I've just got 2 slides to share with everybody. So thanks, Stephen and Pimento, for the opportunity to be with you today. Thanks to Clive. The thing I scribbled down that you said was about being supportive and being relevant to your clients, and that's absolutely bang on, and what we've gleaned from everything we've been doing. And in fact, Q&R, as you quite rightly said, Stephen, we formerly looked after employee engagement and client satisfaction. I'm starting to change that whole language now, and actually it's about employee sentiment and client understanding, or understanding your clients better. And we've used the P word, pivoted our business to really focus on those 2 things, to really understand what agency employees are going through. So mental health and well-being has been a big feature for us, but also encouraging our agency clients to ask their clients really what's going on for them and get an understanding and a snapshot of what their anxieties might be and what their challenges and blocks are. So moving it from engagement and satisfaction to sentiment and understanding. So when lockdown was announced, I thought, well, we sit on this fantastic tool, the Pulse Check tool, which can quickly understand and identify what people are feeling and thinking. And with 1 or 2 clients deferring regular client satisfaction and interviews that they had been doing whilst they fought the fires of coronavirus, I thought, well, we've got some capacity. What can we do? What can we give away? What free stuff can we do that will really support people and that is relevant? So harking back to Clive's point there. So we quickly came up with a mental health and wellbeing question template, drawn some psychology experts, and we formulated a plan to go out to as many agencies as possible to offer that as a free pulse check. And happily, we've now, over the last 6 weeks, heard back from 2,500 employees across the independent sector. Some of the larger groups as well are getting involved, but I'm just reporting back on those results from the independent sector for purposes of today. So, Stephen, would you mind very kindly sharing my first slide? I gave him the pressure of doing that. And so the first slide is all about the key themes we identified. Full screen mode, marvellous. So from those 2,500 responses, we've distilled it down into 8 groups. And I would say use these back in your own business if you can, in leadership meetings, to really think through, do you understand each of these areas? So these are the themes that were pulled through. Working from home setup, this was much more at the early stage, probably first week of April. There was a lot more concern around whether people had the right setup, whether they had even a desk that they could work at, or was it the kitchen table with 5 other juniors in their household. Have they got good Wi-Fi, and have they got a desk chair that's going to give them postural issues or not? So just maybe checking in with teams, and that's probably, if you haven't got that sorted, then why not? But there's no government requirement currently to have the right height and spec, but perhaps your HR lead or those responsible for line managers, just to check in that people are comfortable, at least in their working environment. They've got enough natural light, and they're looking after themselves physically. Life stage, what became very clear very quickly was that people are clearly at very different stages, but that, back again, Stephen?
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
You there?
Yeah, I'm still there, but you've slipped through to the next slide. You need to go back again, please.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. So life stage, it became clear that the stage we're at really impacts heavily on how we feel and how our mental health and well-being is affected. So if you picture the many different scenarios there might be, you might well have 4 or 5 people, as I mentioned, in a high rise with no garden, no balcony, all sharing for space and to be heard, through to those that perhaps have the luxury of a study and a garden and space to spill out into. So very diverse life stages and situations. And then the middle section who are perhaps trying to homeschool as well. So think through your teams, who's under what pressure and why, and it could be very much related to their life stage. Work-life balance we saw really interesting here, because there's a blurring, particularly again between those that perhaps are juniors and feel like they have to always be on, and seniors who perhaps have more broken hours, juggling childcare during day and perhaps responding to emails late at night. So there's definitely a trend that the younger with less dependents were feeling put upon, and it depended on the communication between and within a culture to understand how much pressure people were feeling under. So top tip there, seniors, on the bottom of your email, just to put as a one-liner, I'm responding to this. There's no expectation for you to respond. These are the hours that are suiting me. And we found lots of agencies that have done that are really seeing the benefit of juniors actually feeling, okay, I don't have to be always on. Uncertainty falls into two groups around uncertainty of their own personal future and their career and what next, but also the uncertainty around the business. So really clear communication from leadership to the whole team, being transparent as possible about revenues, where the new business pipeline is going to come from. So reassurance is a key word there to allay that ongoing anxiety that people are feeling. Communication, again, that falls into two groups. Communication from top down, so leadership being able to explain what's going on, but communication with each other. And I think Zoom and all the other online and video conferencing has really stepped into that place of lots of the conversations we might have had around the office. But what's missing, and that's key for creative agencies, of course, is those chance collisions that you might have at the water cooler moment or putting the kettle on. So I think technology is going to play an increasing part if working from home persists over the next 3 to 6 months. How do you ensure that you keep that level of creativity and spontaneity rather than always a scheduled meeting for a certain topic? So just thinking laterally about that, how you have that more spontaneous stuff going on in your organisation. One-to-one check-ins, it's easy to think that you just needed those at the beginning to check everybody's okay, but this is really, really key, and it came through loud and clear in all the verbatim comments that people want to be heard, not only on whether they're keeping up with their work objectives, but also how they're actually feeling and doing, and whether you've got a mentor, a buddy system in place, or very good line management or an HR lead, giving people the opportunity, even if they don't take it, but to say that that's in place and that you consider that an important thing. Culture, maintaining the culture that you had before, and how do you continue to grow that and keep it in a positive direction. And good ideas that came through from teams where, I mean, lots of them have been done now, but we were seeing these in the early week or two around, you know, virtual pub, a virtual coffee morning, a bake-off, any of those things that you can try, that you would do offline, trying to recreate an online version, and getting everybody involved to seed ideas about how you do that, not just relying on leadership teams to come up with that. And then the big one, and this is increasing, the most recent pulse checks we've done with agencies, a huge fear about returning to the office, and we'll come on to some stats on that at the moment, but specifically about public transport, particularly if your team are coming into London main hub stations and then onto the tube. And then what's it going to be like? Are we going to be in an apocalyptic sci-fi type environment with masks and distance desks and screens? What will that really look like? So again, some reassurance and some creative solutions from your team to try and get you into a place where it's not going to be so terrifying to be back. So the second slide, thanks Stephen, I've just pulled out 8 key stats, and for any of you that would like all the full aggregates that we've pulled now, very happy to share those, but I just thought for the sake of time and people losing the will with research data, the top left-hand box, 72% mental health scores, so we rated that simply from a 1 to 10 scale, so clearly 72% is in actually quite a good place, and we've seen that tracking up over the last few weeks. It was significantly lower. And I think as people are getting used to the working from home and the lockdown being alleviated slightly, that score has gone up. So that's a simple check you can do for yourselves with your teams, just a 1 to 10 end of week, and get an aggregate for your business to take the pulse. I would highly recommend. Also, anonymised feedback. Stuff does come out of the woodwork. All the agency heads I've been talking to have been quite surprised at the comments that have come, they sense that everyone was kind of okay. But when people are given an anonymised opportunity to feedback, you see that there are actually pots of quite distressed people. So do not underestimate the fact that people are trying to make sure they're putting on a brave face to keep jobs and look and give the air of being positive. But underneath, there might well be a pocket of issues within your own businesses. So opportunity to feedback anonymously is really valid. 1 in 3 are struggling with work and home life balance. I alluded to that with the seniors perhaps having broken hours and therefore juniors feeling like they're always on. So there's this blurring between what's work and what's home, particularly if they don't delineate between their workstation and where they're eating supper. But that does mean 2/3 are actually in quite a good place. And many of us will have experienced the opportunity to perhaps do more exercise, take up a new hobby, play more saxophone in my case. And so Clive's comment around why didn't we do this years ago, there are some positives from working from home, working flexibly, that will be brought into the workplace going forward. So again, pulling on your team's views on that, making sure that you build a new work environment going forward that builds on the positives. The top 2 boxes are pretty straightforward and not surprising for communications agencies. At least half or just over half are feeling there's good communication, but there's always room for improvement. That means 40–50% don't feel there's sufficient communication. So doing that in different ways, email, video broadcasts. Some agencies are doing letters to homes just to reassure, like one-to-one CEO to an employee, to all employees with a handwritten letter has been a really nice touch, or greetings cards or small gifts, just something that keeps that flow and sense of cohesiveness through the challenges. Bottom left, 1 in 5 aged under 25 are suffering extremely high and low moods or social withdrawal, both of which are symptoms of mental health. And I thought, because it's Mental Health Awareness Week, those bottom 2 boxes, they list out all the understood signs of mental health issues. So if you've got any furloughed staff and they're interested, I'd highly recommend the Mental First Aider training courses offered by a number of organisations. I think St John's Ambulance offers a good one. It's not cheap, but to have a mental first aider within your organisation, it will not only boost that person's skill set, but give the whole company the sense that there is someone within the business that really gets this stuff. You are not therapists as leaders, you're not counsellors, but you are there to create the best working environment possible. And on the basis, again, in that second box along at the bottom, 66% aged 25 and under are suffering one or more signs of mental illness. So that's 2/3 of people claiming to be feeling one of those things. So this is the main bubbling under feeling that I've got from all this work we've been doing, is that it's a hidden impact that could come out in different ways once people start returning to the office. So an awareness of that, and anything you can do to support, and there's lots of resources out there, mental health apps and so forth, I would strongly recommend you look into. And then there's last 2 boxes, the later work we've been doing, very, very high figures, virtually 100% reservations about return to the office. Of course, you know, we might be asymptomatic, we might be transmitting virus, etc. So anything there on reassurance is going to be vital. And 82% nervous about travelling. And those figures will start to come down, I'm sure, over the next week or 2 as measures are put in place, and people can start to see that it is possible, and they will enjoy that community of being back in the office together. So that was my rattle through the findings of 6 weeks of 2,500 employees. So I hope that's given you some pointers, but do use the key theme slide to feedback to your team on making sure you've covered everything. Back to Stephen.
Wow, a lot of data there and a lot of really interesting insights. And confirmation, obviously, of some of the stuff that we've heard over the last few weeks, and also some new themes really coming through. As you said, it's a Mental Health Awareness Week, and both Susie Moore, who's on this Zoom call, and Michelle Morgan, who I know many of you know and was on our call a few weeks ago. There are a stack of mental health courses that one can engage with, and in fact, actually, Mish and Susie run a course that can be done over Zoom, and actually having mental health trainers and facilitators and being able to recognise the issues that surround mental health are immensely important. particularly if you actually are working with a disparate group of people, because I suspect even those that are going back to the office, and my son's going back to the office next week, only a third of the team are going back, and they're on rotation. 3 days a week they're allowed to go in. So we're still going to see a mixed economy in terms of people working independently as well as from office environments, and that will continue to actually have an impact on people's mental health. And God forbid we get a second peak, because that will have another further impact. So yeah, two actions on that. The other thing is to say that Helen Turner, where are you, Helen? I think you're somewhere on this call. We're working with a new member that joined us very recently, who are a professional services provider, but what they help us, it's a company called Corporate Concierge Club, and they are providing packs of really lovely goodies that you can send to your teams as a little thank you for obviously the period that they've been out, and welcome back to. We'll be posting information on that. I think there's a 15% discount offered to all Pimento members, a bit of a plug there for them. But actually, important to say thank you, I think, to your teams who've obviously been coping very, very well. 3 other things I wanted to mention, and we've got a couple of minutes for questions. One is we've got a really interesting session tomorrow afternoon on post-COVID. One of our members, China Insight, who work very much, as the name would suggest, in the China market, have been doing some research and studies into Beijing and into what's happening in China, in North America and London, and how people are beginning to cope as they come out, what businesses are doing, but more importantly, how brands are behaving and how consumers are responding to brand messaging. We've got Pimento Pilates, as always, on Friday. And as I say, a really interesting session on mental health and beyond on Wind Down Friday, which is the MAAG's event at 2 p.m. on Friday, which is jointly hosted by Michelle Morgan and Paul Woolley. So had a few questions. I'll be very, very quick, because I know you've already got to skimp off to other calls, and I don't want to lose too many of you, if I can. First one is a question for Paul. Are you still with us, Paul?
Yeah, still here.
Thank you. Quick one was, has the current situation meant you've had to look at specialisms and technologies outside of your original toolbox?
Definitely, yes. And I think that we were doing that anyway, but what the situation has really forced us to do is to accelerate that timeline and to really look at it within a specific set of context. So whereas before it might be more general about how do we make sure that we're not overtaken by competitors or technologies that we haven't yet bought into, now we have a very specific situation of how do we replace the unique sense of community and engagement emotionally that you get when people come together in a physical environment, and how do we translate what works about that into a digital environment such as we have now, and not forgetting what makes that thing or what makes those things work. So absolutely, we've been very active, and we've actually been getting some traction with some clients on a new kind of hybrid digital physical experience format that we're working on. So I would say, putting the optimistic hat on, absolutely, we've had to very rapidly expand what we're looking at, but in some ways having a specific thing to react against has helped us really focus on what that should be rather than it being a general desire.
Thank you, Paul. One for you, Clive. The question is, how will you be going out to agencies and discussing your new concept?
We will be initially talking to, groups like Pimento, because you're part of it, Stephen. So we're starting off by talking really to collectives, people who represent other agencies, independents. And then once we've got those on board, then we start to look about how we extend it to further agencies. But I think the first thing is to get the temperature from those people who are involved in fighting for the independence en masse, and see if they've got buy-in to this idea of pooling resources.
Thank you. And we know you've been doing some work on the furlough community. Results for them when it comes to mental health, the same or worse than the general community?
Mental health amongst furlough is less. So the average, I'll reveal the average now, it's down at 59%, although we've got some more results coming this week. So they are a good 13, 14 percentage points lower. And the key reasons there are massively clear, that uncertainty and fear that because they were furloughed, they will be first in line for redundancy. So they're seeking either reassurance about their existing role or wanting support on how to face job loss and how to then apply for new work. So yeah, big issues amongst furloughed employees. And happy to talk to anybody offline individually about that if you have got furloughed staff, and I can share the results with you after Friday for the bigger piece of work we've done for MAAG, definitely.
Okay, well, I'll share your contact details after this call, that's okay. Any final questions before we wrap up? I'm just conscious we're slightly over time today. No? All right, well, listen, thank you very much again to our presenters. The video version is available afterwards. And as I say, I look forward to seeing you Wednesday week, which will be our next collective session. And we'll send out a list of all the rest of the events for this week and next after this call. But enjoy the rest of the week and enjoy the sunshine. Particularly, John, you're looking very good, by the way. And Mark, I like your hat. It's excellent. Thank you, sir. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.